There's a question here. As Christians, do we believe in the resurrection? Do we believe in the resurrection? Does it actually change the way that we live? And if we believe in the resurrection and it changes the way we live, then we understand that extension of life is not the highest thing. If you take the Christian worldview out of medical care, then the extension of life becomes almost every. So if I come to your office, I understand that I can actually go to your website and pull down a fee sheet.
Yes, you can.
Totally. So you're telling me that as I make this appointment and I go to your office and I go home and I get the bill, that I know exactly what I'm going to see.
You actually won't get a bill because you'll pay me before you go.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But as I pay before I go, I'm not going to be surprised. I'm going to know that ahead of time.
Yeah. Well, we are required by law to give what's called a good faith estimate, but ours isn't an estimate. Disclaimer, we do have on our fee schedule, fees are subject to change, which I'll notice, so there could be a fee change in between the time you schedule it there. But it's not like it was $200, now it's $1,000, you know,
Right.
That doesn't happen, you know, might be a $10 or $20 difference, but
That's just such a huge shift.
Yeah.
Is that, I think people expect these days, they go and then the bill shows up and it's often shocking, but they have no idea what it's going to, particularly if you end up in some sort of emergency situation. Yeah. So that just seems to be so much better. Is why would you do it one way versus the other way? So as I'm checking out, I'm going to give you my insurance card, right? And then you're going to run the insurance.
insurance cards. No, we the only time we collect insurance cards is when someone wants a procedure we don't do, or they would prefer to run it through their insurance. We'll refer them to a provider who will take their insurance, and oftentimes they want to know that information. But that's the only time we collect those things. Yes.
Yeah. But how do I pay them? It sounds good, right? I go to your site.
Yeah.
I know what I'm going to pay, but my insurance, it's not going to go through the insurance. So what do I do?
You pay. You prepare. It's another thing that's been lost in our generation is the concept of a rainy day fund, and I could get sick. I might have to. In my own personal life, we found out a few weeks ago that our roof was shot. Well, I had put money aside, and it's a big bill, but we had prepared for these things. And that's also part of a Christian aspect of society is keeping your house in order and that type of thing.
So this is what you mean when you say direct, no third party.
Right. That means the patient pays us directly.
Right.
There are different ways that's done. We have a fee schedule. Some primary care doctors have what's called a subscription model. You may pay in our region, because we're more of a low-cost region, you may pay $80 to $100 a month, but you do get very good access and prompt service, and basic blood tests are often included in that. And then there's a more comprehensive model called concierge, which we've heard of, but that's where these doctors might only have 200 people on their panel, but they'll show up at your house at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
It's not a dire emergency, otherwise you might truly need to go to the emergency room. But other than that, they'll make house calls and you pay a higher premium for that. But you definitely get what you pay for in those models. But in all these ramifications of how it's done, the provider is paid directly by the patient.
Yeah. Okay.
Are we going to see more of this concierge type medicine?
In some parts of the country where there's a higher affluency, concierge, I'm not really sure we have any true concierge here in Tri-Cities, because it's $2,000 or $3,000 a year up front, typically. Sometimes $4,000 if you're in LA or New York City, things of those nature. But
right.
But the subscription model, especially if you have a chronic illness and you may go for care 4 to 6 times a year, that's a very good bargain.
Right.
Yeah.
So doesn't this lock out a lot of people from?
We have many people, who are what we would consider poor, who come to us, and. and they're able to pay. We do have the option, and we have done this, render some charity. We have Although admittedly our fee schedule has that in mind, so we do our pro forma based on, we do factor in ability to pay, that type of thing.
Right.
But even in the most dire of circumstances, totally free anything to the poor is not a good idea. There always has to be even some skin in the game, even if it's $20, that type of thing. And years ago, I read a wonderful essay by Dr. Joe Morecraft, great Presbyterian minister. It was called The Reconstruction of Medicine. And it was just a wonderful essay, but at the very end, he made some brief comments on, well, who's responsible to pay the doctor? And actually, he showed in my mind, he convinced me biblically that charity is one of the last options I have. There are other people that are responsible to pay before I am.
Sure.
The scriptures clearly say that if we don't care for our own, we're worse than an infidel.
Yeah.
So, like, let's say my mother, for example, admittedly she has Medicare, but let's just say she didn't have that. It's my duty and my sister's duty to provide care for her
Yes.
before anybody else. And then you go down the line and the church may get involved.
Well, let's talk about the church there for a minute. I want to bring a couple of.
Can we define charity first? I think it's a word that's not used appropriately. Yeah. And so charity would be, if we took a different century's view, and so I'll use this as an example. So Dr. O'Roark provides charity for a patient and they're unable to pay, but I'm going to use this, but they were able to chop wood for Dr. or clean his office or do some other kind of task to pay for that. That's still charity.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And there is this thought in the society where, well, if you have to do anything for it, it's not charity. And that is just a wrong thought.
Uh-huh.
And so I think we need to encourage people that when you're helping them to have some kind of expectation of something that they do. So the practice at Westminster Presbyterian Church here in Kingsport, if somebody needs help, the expectation is you have to come to a service. That's very, very low bar.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, that's a very low bar.
Sure.
And most people don't want to do that either.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So I do want to mention, well, what is the role of the church here? And I want to draw from two different passages. One of them is Galatians 6, where it tells us two principles there. One is to bear one another's burdens, right? And so it's not specifically talking about healthcare, but it is, but that would be inclusive,
Sure.
right? That when there is a burden that needs to be borne by the wider community of believers, that they do that. And then later in the passage, it says, carry your own load, right? And that load and that burden are actually distinct words. One of them implying something that's extremely difficult to bear, and the other one kind of implying something that you should throw over your shoulder and carry as you walk around. And so there's a principle that we provide for ourselves, right? Rainy day fund, whatever we need it to, we do plan for that and we do it. But when we have something that's burdensome, then the principle is that the church will help bear that burden. And then the other passage I wanted to draw from is Acts 2, where we actually see that in practice. And it gives a very short picture of life in the church where says they had all things in common. And as people had need, they were selling their property and other things in order to provide for those needs. Now, some people take that too far and want to take it to socialism, and that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about that people were using the means that they have in order to bear the burdens of the other member of the fellowship. And so I agree, is that there is a family responsibility that is clear. We could go to scriptures for that as well, but then there's also a church responsibility beyond that. And I kind of want to say that's where it stops.
Can I give you an example? So when Carol and I were first married, Pastor Bradley's father, Gene Bradley, had his kidneys were failing, and so he was at the end of life circumstance. And so Pastor Bradley asked the church to volunteer to stay with Gene those last weeks of his life to help Connie out. So Carol and I, newly married 4 or 5 months, so 2004, 2005, whenever it was. So we went to their house and we took a 4-hour shift to sit with Gene, who was comatose. He could speak. And then there was Connie, his wife. And it was such a, I mean, I get teary about it even today. It was such a blessed time. She told all the great stories from their life and their marriage. And we laughed and we cut up. And so here's a man on his deathbed where his wife was sharing the joy of their marriage. And so what a great example of Christian charity.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. And as we're talking about it, in my mind was just contrasting that with what we saw in COVID, where people weren't even allowed to come in and family members were not even allowed to be there. And so that contrast, what a difference a Christian worldview made. How are we going to prioritize these decisions? Well, there are things that are much more important than the possibility of transferring a sickness. There are things that are much deeper and much more important than that. And a Christian worldview recognizes that.
Well, you do see, as both of my parents passed away, and we showed up at the hospital and we took them home. And it was a good example that Pastor Bradley's mom and dad had said. And of course, my family would have done that. But the people in the hospitals and the places are amazed that people were still willing to do that. And I could never remember in my greater family where there's not that many Christians, but that ethic is still there. It's our responsibility. And sometimes people die in a hospital, but we're in those end of life things. Why would you want to die in the hospital?
Yeah, it's a good question.
And let's take a step back from the emotional part of that and how good that was from all of our family, the appropriate type of pride for doing that, but the economic benefit for not wasting the resources of other people. And we didn't do it because of that, but that was the consequences, not the unintended consequences. And so, and we made decisions for my mother and my father based on, well, no, we're not going to do all this. It really doesn't. We want to extend my dad's pancreatic cancer, or we want to extend his life by a month, and it's going to be painful and ugly. And why would you do that? My mother had heart failure. Sure, we could have taken her to the Mayo Clinic or someplace and done it. You get another so many months. Why prolong the agony? My mother was a good Christian woman, and she said, my time's come.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the great unintended consequences of the current system we have. We put death responsibility on somebody besides the family, and we should be responsible for that.
Yeah.
I understand sometimes people die in a hospital, but it should be not the norm. Would you agree?
Yeah.
And so we should strive to do that. Part of the training, which I've not done a good job with my own children, is my expectation is if you can bring me home, you should bring me home.
Yeah. So now we're getting into this is, I think, one of the key issues in the way that we think of medical care in general, but also in the church. There's a question here. As Christians, do we believe in the resurrection? Do we believe in the resurrection? Does it actually change the way that we live? And if we believe in the resurrection and it changes the way we live, then we understand that extension of life is not the highest thing. If you take the Christian worldview out of medical care, then the extension of life becomes almost everything because there's no after.
Right.
And so what's going to drive your practice is whatever you can do to extend life. That's the primary thing, because after that, it's over. But the Christian worldview says there's a resurrection. And if we actually believe into that, then that leads us to prioritize things that we wouldn't prioritize otherwise.
Well, and here's the thing. It sounds hard, but it's really not hard. If we're standing here, and I'm going to use a absurd kind of thing, and so I will qualify this. If you're 25 years old or 30 years old, and you have a young family, and I would encourage somebody given the circumstances, we should try to do everything we can do. There's a reason for that. There's so many great responsibilities. But my dad, in that case, who was 72 years old, and we made the right decisions, good. But when you're standing there and you've got somebody who's at the end of their life, and we all know it, and we take good counsel from physicians, and we can tell, and you're standing there, and they say, well, do everything that you can do to save them so that they can live another month. And say, okay, we'll do that. We're going to take it out of your estate.
Yeah.
And you're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so the person who is sick, if they're wise, will look at their children and go, why are you doing that? Because those resources would be better used for other things.
Right.
And so knowing that we're going to be resurrected makes that decision a lot simpler, right?
Yes.
And so I think a hard conversation that families have to have is you have to have at least part of this on the front end. And so, and I do think station of life and time in life makes a big difference. I mean, if you're a 35-year-old guy with a bunch of little kids and you've got some fatal cancer that, is only a 7% chance, that's a different decision than if you're 85 years old. And people go, well, that's just wrong. You shouldn't look at that way. Well, yeah, you should. That's okay, right? But we won't make those hard economic decisions because we don't pay for it. But if you were paying for it, you would make different decision, and the person who was dying, particularly if they were Christians, would make a different decision.
Right.
Right. And so that's the hard conversations you have to have.